What's up, everybody? So many of you ask me if it's better to get a doctorate degree or a master's level degree if you want to be a therapist in private practice. And I can almost hear the underlying assumption in that question. Hey there, Dr. Marie Fang. You must think that all that extra time and tons of money must have been totally worth it. But my thoughts may not be quite what you'd expect. So hang tight, in this video, I'm gonna break down the real story of who earns the most in private practice. Welcome to Private Practice Skills. I'm Dr. Marie Fang, psychologist in private practice. I post videos offering tools I learned the hard way about starting and growing private practice so that you don't have to. Okay, so I don't have any real formal data to back this up, but just a cursory look at the therapists around me, and it does seem to be that on average, psychologists, aka licensed therapists with a doctorate degree, tend to charge more per hour than therapists with a master's degree. But I wanted to kind of double check this hunch, so I did a little bit of my own research. I made a spreadsheet using public listings from Psychology Today's Find a Therapist directory. I entered my zip code with no added filters and compiled the information from the first 100 therapist profiles that popped up. Now, in this spreadsheet, I only included data from licensed therapists, so this doesn't reflect therapist intern rates or other certifications such as certified drug and alcohol counselors. Now, of the 100 therapist profiles that I looked at, 86 publicly listed their rate online. And of those 86, 17 were licensed psychologists and 69 were licensed master's level therapists, which were primarily LMFTs and LCSWs. Within this data I collected, the average hourly cash rate for psychologists was $236, while the average rate for licensed master's level therapists was $168 per hour. That's an average difference of $68 an hour. I mean, that's a big difference. Now, I'm fully aware that this data is not at all representative of all therapists across the US. It is definitely localized to my area, which, by the way, is a particularly expensive area. And also, it's specific to those who have their profile listed on Psychology Today. But I still think this is really useful information as a jumping off point for the rest of this video. Now, after we know that difference of $68 an hour between what master's level therapists charge and psychologists charge in private practice, we might want to draw the conclusion that psychologists earn much more in private practice than master's level therapists, right? Now, not so fast. There are two issues with this assumption. Now, in order to really do this evaluation justice, we have to account for the difference in tuition costs for a doctorate degree versus a master's level degree. In my home state of California, most MFT degrees cost somewhere between $55,000 and $70,000 in total, just as long as you're not attending USC. My goodness, that's a lot of tuition. In contrast, the average PsyD in clinical psychology in my state costs anywhere from $120,000 to upwards of $250,000 in total, depending on how long you take to complete your grad program, which, keep in mind, tends to vary much more for the doctorate degree because of the dissertation. If you're working on your dissertation right now, much love to you, because I do not miss that phase of life. So on the more conservative side of things, doctorate level therapists can expect to pay at least twice as much as master's level therapists on their tuition, and it can go up to 4 times as much as a master's degree. Now, one huge caveat to everything I just mentioned: for those doctorate students who are accepted into a grad program under a research grant, their tuition is often waived, and they may even receive a small stipend for the cost of living. We further need to take into consideration that the time between starting graduate school and getting licensed is wildly different between doctorate level and master's level therapists. So we also need to account for delayed income when we're factoring in that a psychologist is charging more per hour on average than a master's level therapist. I mean, most master's programs take 2 to 3 years to complete, and then an additional 2 to 3 years to accrue hours in order to qualify for licensure. Meanwhile, most doctorate programs take at least 5 to 7 years to complete, if not more, and then another 1 to 2 years of postdoc work in order to qualify for licensure. So in other words, in the time that it takes to complete just the doctorate degree, you could have already gotten licensed at the master's level and earning your full income potential. And let's not forget about interest rates on those darn student loans. With an average student loan interest rate of 5.8%, a student loan of $70,000 for a master's degree would cost about $50,000 in interest on a 20-year loan, while a student loan of $200,000 would cost cost $140,000 in interest on a 20-year loan. I mean, that interest alone is just about enough to cover the cost of tuition for a second doctorate degree. Listen, give me my second doctorate degree. I wouldn't mind that. Now, if we adjust the repayment plan from 20 years to 30 years, then you're totally screwed. So after accounting for all of this math, it's much easier to see that across a lifetime, a psychologist doesn't necessarily earn more than a master's level therapist just because they might be charging more per hour. In fact, this makes a clear argument that a psychologist needs to charge more per hour than a master's level therapist just to make the same amount of money in the end. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this video that there are two issues with the assumption that psychologists earn more than a master's level therapist. And I do think that first point I made is completely valid on its own, but the second point makes that first point completely moot. Now, listen carefully. There is no rule for how much therapists of different credentials are allowed to charge in private practice. Yep. So you can literally charge whatever amount you want per hour, assuming there are clients who are willing to pay you at that rate. And while we're on that tangent, just look at how much life coaches are charging these days. I mean, why aren't we charging $1,000 an hour? Someone's willing to pay it. Think about it. I've met more psychologists than I can count who've charged below the going rate for their services, trying to launch private practice and not being able to get more than 1 or 2 clients through their door. And I also know of many master's level therapists who charge higher than going rate for their credentials and are completely booked. So if your end game is to maximize how much you can earn in private practice, your degree really doesn't have much to do with it. Or if anything, it's easiest to make the argument that the lower tuition, faster licensure, and lower interest on student loans makes it easier to earn more if you have a master's level degree. Now, the decision to pursue a doctorate versus a master's level degree is completely up to you based on your own interests, preferences, etc. Not to mention the array of various doctorates and master's level degrees available within the field of psychology. It suddenly got very dark outside. But I really discourage you from making the decision to go with a doctorate degree solely because you see that psychologists tend to charge more per hour and therefore assume that they must earn more overall. That's not necessarily how it works. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments why you decided to go with whatever degree you've pursued in psychology, and until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well. Today's video is brought to you by TherapyNotes.com. TherapyNotes helps with scheduling, notes, and billing so that you can spend more time with your clients and less time on back office paperwork. Click the link in the description of this video to get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment. Now, of those 100 therapists that I look like, that was weird, who are accepted into a grand program, it is quite grand. Just because they charge more per hour. We did it, Marie.